Thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. This is our final webinar for our fall series for peer support services. Today, we're going to highlight recruitment, hiring, and onboarding, and we are all very happy that you're able to join us today. Before we get into it, I just want to go over a little bit of housekeeping. Today's session will be recorded. I know that the notice did pop up, but I just want to make that aware for those that are still popping in that today will be recorded. The slides will be made available after today. And we do encourage you to be engaging and to utilize that chat to chat in your questions throughout the presentation. A few of us will be monitoring that chat today. And there will be an opportunity for questions at the end, but we do, like I said, encourage that that engagement throughout the presentation today. So I appreciate that. So to introduce myself, I'm Amy Proley. I am a credentialed family peer advocate. I am the co-director for the Peer Tech Training, Technical Training Assistance Center here at Peer Tech. So I welcome you all, and I would like to hand it over to my co-presenter today, Jennifer Fuchs, to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Fuchs. I am also a professionally credentialed family peer advocate, and I am the interim director for Children, Family Treatment and Support Services and High Fidelity Wraparound at SEO Family of Services. And I'm happy to be here with you today.
Oh, thanks, Jen, and I'm happy you're able to join us. Jen comes to us with a really diverse experience as a supervisor, as a peer provider. So I'm really happy to have her here to be able to join us in this conversation today. And I really am excited to see such a great turnout. And I love that everybody has been popping in the chat who they are and where they're from. So I appreciate that. To include, to add to that, I really would love to just kind of get a sense of who is in the room if you have not shared in that chat, and what your primary role is, right? So we do this little roll call and Angelique will launch this. It's a poll. And to be able to identify what your role is, and whether you're a director, whether you're a manager, a supervisor, who is a peer, who is not a peer, a peer specialist, an advocate. If you could, really just share your role within your agency or your organization through the poll, that would be amazing. And if that poll, any of those options don't meet the criteria of your role, I encourage you to use the chat to chat in what your role is.
Great.
So give
Yeah, I'm gonna
everybody a
give it a couple
moment.
more seconds for people to fill it out.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm. Okay. Let me share.
All right. So, wow. Okay. 44% are program directors or managers. That's great. Really, very diverse group here. And I've seen some of the folks pop in their information into that chat. So I really appreciate that. So we do have supervisors that identify as a peer, and then 21% that are not a peer. Interesting. So I love to see that the variant in who we have in that room, because to me, that will provide a more engaging conversation and a lot of different lenses to be able to bring to the conversation here. So I appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. So to get started, I just wanted to give an overview of the day or well, not the day, of the afternoon and what we're going to be discussing. So just a brief overview of our agenda today. We are welcome and introductions. You can check that off. We are going to talk about the organizational self-assessment tool that we have here at Peer Tech. That is a big component of what we're doing today. And what the results of that will be able to, guide your takeaways from the conversations today about preparing to hire, some of those service qualifications, a little bit of a conversation about recruitment, interviewing and hiring, onboarding, and then retention. So it does seem like we're covering a lot, but they all are just as important as the next when, really building a great model for hiring and implementing peer services. So with that, I want to dive right into that organizational self-assessment. So the organizational self-assessment, it's a tool that will be able to highlight what is successful, right? And, what is needed for to be able to have the inclusion of peer support services across the lifespan. And the organizational assessment will highlight, steps that an organization or an individual can take to ensure that quality peer services are included. And what it does is gives you an opportunity to be able to self-assess, to be able to look through and self-reflect as to what it might look for you and what it might look for that organization moving forward. Um, it is a reflection tool, right? So the function of that is to, really look at yourself, look at your organization, and utilize it as an educational tool to reflect on how prepared your organization is for the successful inclusion of peer support services. If we can move to the next slide. Thank you. Thank you. And for the successful peer support services in your service delivery, right, in that continuum, whether you're starting up as a new service, whether you're making improvements to existing service provision, or whether you're growing your peer support services, right? So you might be in a situation where your agency or organization only provides, one level of peer services. You might only be providing adult peer services, and you're looking to bring on family and youth as well. So there's a lot of different variants of possibilities here. The OSA has been adapted from a nationally recognized resource on successful peer workforce inclusion. So it is, nationally recognized, and it really does provide some quality improvement indicators. And while we're going through that, I would just want to highlight that the OSA uses the term peer specialist / advocate. So you'll see it abbreviated as PS/A. And we know that, in the behavioral health world, we do have a lot of those acronyms. So I'd like to be able to highlight that you might come across that PS/A. And that reflects the many similarities in those who provide the peer support services across the lifespan. But it is important to understand the differences, that there are those 3 distinct credentials that are used separately to indicate the different designations, whether it's in the adult serving or the child serving system. So those 3, and I'm sure we're familiar with those, but just as a refresher, is your adult certified peer specialist, your credentialed youth peer advocate, and your credentialed family peer advocate. And each PSA specialty has its own training, guiding principles, core values, code of ethics, and scope of practice to define the fidelity of the peer, the specific peer practice. Next slide. Great, thank you. So a little bit about the OSA. Since we are in our 3rd webinar, I really do, I hope that a lot of you are familiar with this, because we have been, really utilizing this throughout the webinar series. But for those of you that are new, okay, the OSA has 4 categories. It has 4 domains, and they are the competency sections. You have the knowledge of peer support practice, organizational culture, recruiting, hiring, and onboarding, and then supervision. In the first 2 previous webinars, we did cover the knowledge of peer practices and organizational culture. Today, we're going to highlight the hiring and onboarding competency area. And you might find that your organization has some unrecognized strengths in some of these areas and some unexpected opportunities for improvement. You might also be able to highlight some of your strengths, right? And be able to celebrate the areas where you identify where you're excelling. And each of the section of the OSA contains feedback on your ratings. And at the end of the OSA, there's ideas for creating an action plan to accomplish those improvements. Today, we're not going to go through the full OSA. We're only going to focus on the section of it that pertains to the hiring and onboarding. Overall, the OSA consists of 25 competency statements that allows you or your organization to assess the current strengths and readiness to start or expand peer support services. And you'll see that each of those competency statements begins with our organization. And that there are examples to illustrate different levels to provide the overview of what that domain might be focusing on and why. This can be completed individually, like I said, and also can completed as a team. Obviously, today we're going to complete it individually. But when you do that, you can look at it, from a lens of what you could do as an individual, as a champion, right? Or you can think about, your team and your agency when you're answering those questions. You will choose from a rating of 1 to 3 to indicate the quality of the current state of peer support services within that organization. So next slide, please. So just to take a closer look, right, at those ratings. So you'll see, that there's 1 is adequate, or 1 is needs improvement, 2 is adequate, and 3 is exemplary. And at the end of each section, you'll see a score specific to that section. So today, like I said, we'll be focusing on that hiring section, and you will score yourself just based on that section. If you were to go in and complete the entire OSA, each section does give you an individual score. And then there is you can print that out and there's a full report. So it can be used individually by section, or it can be used as a full assessment. And the feedback can be very helpful when you're to think about how your organization approaches peer support services. And it can especially be helpful if you're completing it, as part of a team, like I said. So the section that we're going to focus on is that hiring and onboarding. So a little bit about when you go in. I'm going to share a QR code in a minute, and I'm going to ask that each one of you scan that QR code, and that will take you into that OSA tool. You kind of have to fast forward through the first 2 sections, and you don't have to answer the questions, but feel free. I will allow time if you would like to answer those sections as well. But you can just fast forward to those, right to that hiring and onboarding section. So there's a couple ways to do that, but I just wanted to give you that little context that you can answer them if you want, but you don't need to. You can fast forward. So without further ado, here is the QR code. Okay, so you can scan this, and then it will navigate you to that OSA. And then you can, like I said, do a little reading there, and then you can fast forward to that hiring and onboarding section. So I will give you a little couple minutes here to be able to complete that.
I know somebody asked, how do you rate if you don't currently have peers?
Oh, yep, good question. If you don't currently have peers, you can certainly say, you can say that you need improvement, right? So, obviously you need some improvement in being able to bring peers on. Or you could just not answer it, I suppose. Thank you for highlighting that, Angelique. I lost my chat box.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm like trying to find it and get it back here. Oh, there we go. Right. And if folks, as you finish, if you want to pop in the chat, a little thumbs up to give me an idea that, you've moved through that, that would be excellent. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Kristen. Okay, folks, we'll give you about another minute or so. All right, folks, about 30 more seconds, but if you're not finished, don't rush. I want you to be able to take your time. All right. So I hope that a lot of you were able to get through that, and I hope that you were able to see a little bit of an insight as to where you feel your organization falls on that readiness scale, right? Some of those questions when I went through them and asked them, from an individual perspective, I really loved the way that it really provides that opportunity for self-reflection. I'm really huge on self-reflection when it with regards to really implementing services and making improvements and really being strength-based with growth. So I think it's a great tool to utilize. And I hope you're all able to see the differences in the ways that you are able to take that back to your organization. So, but before we move a little further into, thinking about those different domains of that OSA and the different and what it can highlight with regards to hiring and onboarding, I want to just kind of get a feel of where you all fell, right? Where you all felt that you fell with regards to those questions. So I'm going to ask Angelique to launch a poll in a second. If we can move to that next slide. And I want you to think about the topics, right? About the topics for the questions that you all just answered and reflected on. And I would love to see, what item under the topic of hiring and onboarding that you felt was the most challenging for you, right? So think about those topics. Is it, what do you find most challenging? Is it creating job descriptions for, each type of PSA? Is it, the culture that matches the recipients of service, right? Is it competitive compensation? Is that a challenge for you with regards to hiring and onboarding? Flexible work schedule, or, is it on the job training, shadowing, coaching, mentoring? Think about, how you answered some of those questions and which one of these do you think is the most challenging for you or for your agency currently? I'll give you a second here to pop your answers into that poll.
Okay.
Competitive compensation at 49%. I'm not totally surprised by that, right? That's really a challenge that we have been facing, in the behavioral health field for a long time, right? So I'm not totally surprised by that. It is a challenge to really make these positions uh, to be compensated for the quality of work that we are providing and for the importance of what we're doing, right? For sure. On the job training came in second with 31%. On the job training, shadowing, coaching, mentoring. Yes, I can definitely see how that can be a challenge. And flexible work schedule. Oh, okay. And the culture, right? And then creating job descriptions at 3%. Yeah, definitely the compensation and that on the job training with shadowing and coaching and mentoring. I'm not totally surprised by that. I wish I could say I was, but I'm not. But I thank you all for sharing. And I really hope that, as we weave through this afternoon's presentation, that, we are able to provide a little bit more support in that area and a little bit more highlights for you to take away to be able to strengthen that. So if we could move to that next slide, which is preparing to hire. Okay. So with preparing to hire, I am going to actually pass this off to Jen, who has some experience in preparing to hire. So Jen, you want to take it away?
Sure. So it's really important to prepare and plan before hiring peers in your organization. You really need to be proactive in this area rather than reactive. This way we can create an environment in which peers can thrive and help to grow our programs. Next slide, please. The first thing that you're going to do is prepare the position. So your organization needs what we call a champion. This person should ideally be somebody in executive leadership, somebody who can look at organization policies, and somebody who has the ability to affect organization culture and organization policy. So you want to put together a team of key people, including peers or others who receive services. And you also want to designate a supervisor at this time. You're going to want to ensure that you understand the different types of peer services and research the salaries, especially since we all heard that that's one of our biggest issues, right? So you're going to create a job description as well so that everyone, including the peer advocate, is aware of the job responsibilities. And next slide. So it's important to remember the unique role of a peer staff member when developing job descriptions. For example, we often see lines on job descriptions under responsibilities labeled all other duties as assigned. This type of information can blur the lines of a peer role, and it would be best to reframe the language to say all other duties as assigned within the scope of the peer advocate scope of practice. So, peers can serve in various types of roles, and oftentimes we're asked to do things that are not exactly within the scope of our practice. So that's why the job description is really important for the peer to have. And you really should have it upon interviewing so that if they ask what the responsibilities are going to be, you can produce the job description and you can say, and they can review it beforehand to make sure that it's something that they're comfortable with. And also something that you're comfortable with. Next slide. So you're going to want to make sure that you include stakeholder input when you're going through the hiring process. This includes people who have received services. So maybe, you might want to ask people who have received services at your organization. You're going to want to include peer staff. You're going to want to include organizational leaders. So these individuals know some of the qualities or experiences that may be helpful for peer support staff to bring to the agency, as well as some that may not be beneficial. And if your agency happens to have a peer advisory council or even a family advisory council, a youth advisory council, this would be an ideal opportunity to integrate a couple of those members into the hiring process. Next slide. So here we are at compensation, and this is probably one of, I would agree that this is probably one of the biggest hurdles to tackle is compensation, right? Because compensation in organizations is usually reliant upon reimbursement rates. And, so your salary is going to be dependent upon the reimbursement rate for the service. However, it really needs to be noted that within the peer workforce, it is very difficult to find people who have the qualities to provide these services. And so you really should consider, providing competitive compensation in order to be able to hire and retain peer staff, because you can't just go to a school or a job fair and recruit peer staff. It's a little bit more unique, and compensation is probably one of the biggest issues in even creating a hierarchy for peer staff. So you really want to sit down and research all of those salaries that are around. You want to pay peers competitively with your clinical staff. So look at the pay scales and job descriptions for your current staff, and then let that help you develop job descriptions and compensation that can clearly differentiate the roles of peers and non-peer staff, because the peer service is not less valuable, it's just different. Next slide. So supervisor qualifications. This is actually an area that's actively evolving. And so I'm going to refer you to PureTech's website to the resources on supervision for more information. And however, it should be noted that peer staff do need to receive in-service supervision from another peer in order to really provide effective service delivery. And there are many ways that you can do that. And again, you can refer to PureTech's website for more information, as this is an actively evolving area within peer support. Next slide. So another thing that's very important when considering hiring peer staff is providing a flexible work schedule. We're talking about people who have lived experience and just being human beings. So during the hiring process, individuals considering work as a peer may have questions about how full-time or part-time employment may impact benefits that they receive, right? You're talking about peers who might be receiving disability benefits. They might be receiving SSD, SSI, whatever disability benefit that they're receiving. And a lot of people not only don't want to lose it, they can't lose it. They really need, some of the benefits that come with that disability insurance. So you're going to want to make sure that you're knowledgeable in that area, or be able to refer them to an appropriate resource to help them with determining whether, full-time or part-time employment is beneficial for them. So it's not incumbent on the hiring staff to raise these issues. It's just important for organizations to point the new employee to this information and guidance on navigating these benefits. Ideally, peer staff should be advised to consult with a benefits coordinator so that they can make informed decisions about the optimum number of hours to work to ensure they maintain a livable wage and benefits, which is now going to transition us to onboarding. Oops. Oh, it's not. I apologize for that. Just kidding. The career ladder. So the career, it's another thing is important to establish is a career ladder for peers. People aren't going to stay in your organization if they're in a dead end job. You really, and you need to have layers of support in place. So for example, if you can hire a peer supervisor, I would very much recommend that you hire a peer supervisor. A peer supervisor can do everything that a peer specialist can do as well. Peer support staff need opportunities for professional advancement without having to change to a different career field. And peers can supervise peers, as long, with the right credentials. So ideally, you should look oh, apologies. Ideally, you should look to promote current peer support staff, or hire a peer supervisor if possible in order to create that career ladder. A hierarchy is very important. Lack of career opportunities can lead to dissatisfaction and turnover, and the cost of turnover can far exceed the investment in growing and supporting this workforce. It's a lot of times people are afraid to promote peers, or to create, or to encourage, peers from climbing the ladder, because they do such a great job, providing peer services, and they're afraid to lose them. But realistically, if you do promote your peers and you do create that career ladder, you're really just going to attract more peer staff to your organization, and it really will help your programs to grow. Next slide. So now we're going to get into peer service qualifications. And so tell me in the chat, what are some of the qualifications that are needed to provide adult, family, or youth peer support services? Anybody? Yes, lived experience, certification, stability within themselves, certification. I like a lot of certification. So, okay. So next slide. Recovery. Yes, recovery. So the different peer support categories. So there are 3 peer support categories within the mental health system. Adult peer support services are provided to adults who are 18 and over within the adult serving system. Family peer support services are provided to parents or caregivers of youth up to age 21 within the child serving system. And youth peer support service is provided to youth between the ages of 12 to 21 within the child serving system. Next slide. So in order to provide these services, somebody has to have lived experiences within the same system as the service they're providing. So if you're an adult peer specialist or a New York certified peer specialist, you're going to have experience within the adult serving system as an adult 18 and over. Because an adult with lived experience is a person who at some time in their life experienced mental health, addiction, trauma, or related life disruptive challenges that may have included navigating the mental health system. To be a youth, you have to have had experience before the age of 21 within one of the youth serving systems. So to define youth, Lived experience would be a youth or young adult who is between the ages of 18 and 30, whose experience required navigating one or more child serving systems or services such as mental health, special education, child welfare, developmental services, complex healthcare needs, vocational services. And then for family, you have to have been a primary caregiver of a child who has received services within one or more of the child serving systems prior to age 21. So a parent, biological, foster, adoptive, they don't have. So again, like you just see there, they don't not have to be a biological parent. They just have to be the primary caregiver of a child or youth with a significant social, emotional, developmental, medical, substance use, and or behavioral disability, which manifested itself prior to age 21. Next slide. So the qualifications, qualified individuals who may provide peer support services include the following. Adult peer services are provided through OMH New York Certified Peer Specialists or NYCPS. Family peer support services are provided OMH Credentialed Family Peer Advocates or FPACs. And youth peer support services are provided by OMH Credentialed Youth Peer Advocates or YPACs. Each certification pathway offers a provisional credential to enable staff to begin service provision while seeking full credentialing. Next, we're on to the next slide and to the credentialing process. So New York's certified peer specialists are trained through the Academy of Peer Services and approved by the New York State Peer Specialist Certification Board or NYPSCB. Credentialed Family Peer Advocates or FPACs are trained by the Community Technical Assistance Center, CTAC, in collaboration with Families Together in New York State. And credentialed youth peer advocates are also trained through Community Technical Assistance Center or CTAC in collaboration with Families Together in New York State. Next slide. So there are established core competencies for each peer service. For adults, the core competencies are as follows. The adult will engage peers in collaborative and caring relationships. They will provide support. They'll share their lived experience of recovery. They personalize peer support and they support recovery planning. And they link people to resources, services, and supports. Next, we talk about the core competencies for youth peer providers. So youth peer providers competencies include that they're individualized, solution-focused, strength-based. They're making connections. They're culturally humble. They're building skills. They're increasing knowledge. They're engaging, promoting advocacy, broadening horizons, focusing on outcomes, strength-based, and most importantly, they're youth-guided. Next slide. The core competencies for family peer providers are similar to the youth core competencies in that they're individualized, they're solution-focused, they're strength-based, they're engaging, but at the very end, they're also family-driven, right? So the youth core competencies were youth guidance, and the family peer core competencies include being family-driven. Next slide. Which of the core competencies of any of the peer providers stand out as priorities to you for the job descriptions? Just post that in the chat. Lived experience and person-driven, strength-based. Anyone else? Respectful and equal power. I see a lot of strength-based, which is good. Okay. Their ability to set healthy boundaries while simultaneously disclosing personal information about themselves. Negotiation, engaging in strength-based. Okay. So with that, we're going to move on to the next slide, which is recruitment, and I'm going to pass it off to Amy.
Thanks, Jen. And thank you everybody for putting your thoughts into that chat. I couldn't agree more, right? When you think about those core competencies and the skills and the requirements for peer services, right? For peer specialists, for family peer advocates or youth peer advocates, that lived experience, that is the key component. That is what sets peer providers apart from other discipline providers within the behavioral health field, right? So we bring that lived experience. We bring that uniqueness to those individuals that we support. When you think about, how compensation, to take it back to that, to the compensation reaction of, that's really a challenge. It is a challenge, right? How do you define compensation for lived experience, right? A lot of times, when you're thinking about developing job description or you're thinking about recruitment, you're thinking about bringing new staff on, right? You have a lot of different criteria that kind of guides a compensation, right? You have different levels of degrees, you have different levels of, professional experiences and professional development. Lived experience to me is such a unique thing. I always say, I think about back to like, oh, well, what does lived experience mean? Well, lived experience means that I have just as much of an educational background as one does that went to a degree, except I didn't go to college to get my lived experience. I went to the school of life, right? So how do you define that? How do you put a number on that for compensation? It's difficult, but it's definitely something that I think holds a lot of value. And I think that, taking that into consideration when you're thinking about developing those job descriptions, bringing peer services into your organization, what is that going to look like, right? And then if you can define how that's going to look and you can set that standard and you can really highlight the need for peer support services and really put the value behind that, that's going to drive your recruitment, right? That's going to drive on how you think about how you want to recruit, and where you're going to recruit, and who you're going to recruit. So all of those different components really goes into, into how and where, right? So when I think about how and where, I think about where you all fall, because I think about New York State and I think about, regionally, how different our landscape is, right? And how different the needs of each region are, right? Many of us, and you can advance the next slide, please. Many of us, live in various different regions, right? We have rural, we have suburban, urban, and each of those of those areas presents so differently, right? And compensation we know is different across regions and the needs are different across regions. So when you think about all of those different components that go into, starting to think about how you're going to implement peer services into your organization, think about, your region and think about what region you are in, and think about, do you recruit for positions within your region, right? Do you currently have a really strong base of peer support providers? Do you have, are you more predominantly providing adult services? Are you, do you employ adult peer specialists? Are you really just family focused? Are you just youth focused? So, think about that. Think about your region. Think about what it looks like in your region. And do you recruit for positions that provide services for the lifespan? Or are you just, focused on one discipline over the other? I would love to just kind of get a base of where you fall, just utilize that chat. Let me know, are you rural? Are you urban? Are you suburban? And then, also to complement that, are you recruiting for positions? In which one? Are you recruiting for the lifespan? Are you only recruiting for, one over the other? So I see some suburban, rural. Yep, adults. Okay. 18 and older. Yep. Yep. urban, and recruiting. Rural, suburban, urban, recruit across the lifespan. Awesome, awesome. That's great. Great, really diverse. And, and to me, that just really represents the state that we're in. We are in a diverse state for sure. Supportive housing, Nassau County, urban. Yeah. So what about, lifespan? Do a lot of you promote and are recruiting and hiring for the lifespan, or are you just primarily focused on one discipline over the other? I did see a few folks in here saying so 18 and older, yeah, lifespan. We love our peers. We wish we had more. Yes, I agree. I wish we had more as well. Yes, absolutely. Lifespan. So a lot of lifespan here. I'm really happy to see that, right? I'm really happy to see that. To be able to really support the lifespan is just awesome to hear. That way that tells me that we're growing, that we're evolving, within our service provision and within our reach. Recruiting FPAs across the lifespan. FPAs across the lifespan. Interesting. Okay. Westchester County has rural and urban. Yep. A lot of counties have rural and urban and suburban, right? So there's a lot of different challenges to meet the needs of, what might pose challenges there with regards to recruitment, right? Some of those challenges might be, access to services, access to transportation. I know that's a huge one with those rural counties is access to transportation, right? We want to be able to, support our peers and be flexible. And not only to, meet our families where they're at, but meet our peers with regards to hiring and recruiting into what their needs are. And transportation is a big one. So yeah, thank you everybody for sharing that. And I'm sure based on your landscape and the area that you're in, recruitment will look a little different for you, right? And how you advertise for positions. So we can move on to the next slide. So, a little bit, about advertising, it can, like I said, it can be different. Just, this chart does, show some examples on some ideas on what to do, and how to really strengthen your workforce with regards to advertising for those peer support positions. There are, lots of different ways to do that, right? But we have to think about that criteria. That's so, so important is that lived experience. And then think about all the other, the other comments that folks have put in there, right? About, sharing your story and about boundaries and about understanding, the components and the core and the competencies of peer services, right? To really be able to recruit and to be able to design and to be able to bring peers on, we have to have awareness and an understanding of all those different pieces. And when you're recruiting, think about where you're going to recruit, right? So if you're recruiting peers for the lifespan, right, you can look at multiple different places, right? You can look at, um, you know, uh, different agencies, different organizations. You can look at colleges. You can use job boards. You can go to different outreach centers. You can do outreach events. You can look and, really partner with other peer-run programs as well. And you could, really think about, where is the staff that you would be looking for? A lot of times is, while we are providing those services, right? And I always say we're in peer support to not be in it, right? I personally as a provider would not, I don't want to be able to be in a situation to provide long-term services. We're there to support individuals, to lift them up, to be able to support them in skill building and in being able to advocate for themselves so that they can, really take that on and to be able to embrace their journey and to be able to, really advocate and move forward, right? We're very strength-based. So a lot of times, advertising for your peer support positions is sometimes looking within, right? Looking at those those individuals that you work with, where they are in their journey, right? And are they ready to transition to be able to help others and to be able to become peer support providers themselves? What are some what are some advertising, you know, outlets or, advertising, tips that you have used that has been successful? I would encourage you to pop those in the chat because we can definitely learn from each other here. I know that, like I said, hiring from within and thinking about, who you work with. It's also about um, who you know sometimes too, and like those like staff referrals are huge, right? Because as an individual who's providing the service, we know what is required and what was needed and what strengths are there, and what skill set would be valuable. So staff referrals, referring who we know. So if you have some, definitely staff referrals are great. Yeah. Job fairs, internal and external. Absolutely, absolutely. And this is, a lot of this, I like to be able to hear website options, right? Word of mouth, job fairs, former recipients with services. Yes. Um, because this is the challenging, right? To be able to build our workforce, be able to hire and to be able to think about where we're going to advertise and, how can we expand on that, especially when we're facing those different, the different regions of the state that we live in and the challenges that are there. Yeah. So job fairs, former recipients with support, absolutely. Staff referrals are huge, right? We know what the work is. And a lot of times folks out in the workforce uh, don't realize that they might necessarily qualify to become a peer support provider, right? They don't realize that it's even like a job, right? So peer specialist training programs in New York City. Yeah, that's great. And it's really creating the awareness, and that advertising really creates that awareness. Next slide, please. So, when we think about the three different disciplines across the lifespan, there's three different audiences, three different targets. So, just a couple tips here for recruitment for youth. To develop a community recruitment plan. It's really important to think about that when you're, thinking about implementing peer services into your organization. And think about where you're going to find youth, right? The colleges, social media. Social media is a huge outlet for youth. Really, it's almost like a lifeline for individuals, and that's where a lot of information does come across, right? Think about the different social media platforms that could be utilized, libraries, community centers, job coaching agencies. Um, I know a lot of folks that are young people that are in colleges, that are in, even in high school, right? There's a lot of job coaching that occurs there, and a lot of career building. And to be able to connect with those types of programs would really be beneficial. And when you're thinking about developing your recruitment plan, really keep in your back of your mind those components of the peer providing services, right? Think about the age and the lived experience requirement. We know that you're not able to become a peer provider unless you have that lived experience and you meet that age requirement. Next slide, please. So a few recruitment tips for family. You want to be able to have a plan that targets parents and caregivers, right? So think about where a parent and caregiver is going to connect, right? So there's your schools, your PTAs, your think about where parents are volunteering, where parents are being, supporting each other naturally within the community. Pediatrician's office, again, social media. Parents are on social media just as much as our young people. I know myself, social media informs me for a lot of things. We don't even turn the TV on. If I want to, find out the latest news story, I'm going to go on social media. Libraries, community centers, think about where parents are coming together. Think about, advertising and recruiting, at different events, right? We talk about job fairs. Well, think about like where your kids are. You got some of those sports tournaments, right? A lot of times there's some informational tables there. Just think about different community events that happen where parents are going to be. Next slide, please. And some recruitment it's for adults, right? So you want to keep all your options open. You want to use your peer networks, use those peer, your peer partners, your peer programs, your in the adult, world of service. There's a lot of peer-led programs, right? There's a lot of peer partners within that community, and networking really provides a lot of valuable opportunities. And really think about the interview process, and think about how it goes both ways. And that can apply, to your family, and to your youth services as well. And think about your retaining, right? Think about what it is that a peer is looking for with regards to work culture, and your peer staff and your training programs. We have a lot of those traditional places where you can, really identify and recruit family and youth. But really give consideration to the next steps, right? So think about, okay, I'm going to recruit. This is my plan. What is your plan? What's your next step? And that next step is going to really drive conversations when you are doing that recruitment, right? And you want to you want to think about the person on the job. And how some peer applicants will have, extensive experiences, while others will have very little. But you also want to remember when you're thinking about recruitment, developing those plans, that you don't want to assume on the existence of skills. And you want to think about how you're going to support that, and how you're going to, like I said, take that next step into the orientation, into the role, into the programming. And think about, supervision, right? As you're, thinking about retention, thinking in recruitment, think about, how is supervision going to look like for you? And think about the values, and think about what is needed to be really onboard, and then to have retention. So next slide, please. All right, so with that, and thinking about, the different components that go into peer services and the requirements that are needed, and how this shapes and develops, right? And the plan, and creating your job description, and thinking about the criteria that you need, thinking about the infrastructure that you need, and the support that you need when you're hiring, and think about interviewing. So think about all those pieces that go into interviewing, and how that can transition, and it can strengthen the interview process for you. So with that, I am going to pass this back to Jen.
Thanks, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
So once you get through the preparation and recruitment, hopefully now you have some candidates and you're going to get ready to interview and hire. How many people here have experience hiring peers? What are some of the highlights, and what have been some of the challenges? Just pop an answer into the chat if you can. A few applicants. I like that, Kristen. I think that I think that's a great thing to do, is to have your peers be a part of the interviewing process. Use a group interview process as a second phase. I like that too. Very good. The challenge is not fully into their own recovery journey to assist somebody else. Some were just not ready and in crisis themselves, but did. Yeah, I see. So a lot. It seems like a lot of the challenges are a lack of readiness on the peer provider part. So, and negative feelings about the setting. Yeah, Diana, that happens. I'll even tell you about myself. I have a youth experience myself too, in addition to a family experience, peer experience. I was a youth in the system, and I was a youth in an SEO program, and then I came to work here. So it is a little bit it's a little bit of an adjustment when that happens. Yep. Very important. Yes, it's really important to get a sense of a candidate's recovery, where they are in that journey. Okay. Clarity about computer and documentation expectations, if any, that are involved with the role. Yeah, and that's why we talk about preparing for the role, right? So that you can be really clear and upfront during the interview and hiring process with that peer provider that, about the documentation, about, the knowledge of technology that they might need to have. For, in my organization, we use an electronic health record. And so our staff do all need to have a certain level of technological like competency in order to take this job. So, but at the same time, certain things are, documentation and technology. You can also train, right? You can also provide trainings for people to be able to help them through, with documentation and trauma. Some had lived experience and stability. So, but again, anything that's documentation, technology, you can train, right? Those are training, those are training needs, and so those are things that you can work with, right? And if you recognize them at the time of the hire, the interview and the hiring, you're prepared, and you know that when the person comes on, maybe you're just going to give them a little bit of an extra trainings in those areas. You're going to focus a little bit more on that documentation. So, anytime I hear things like that, I right away will tell you that it's training. So that's great, Laura. We do something similar. We use a writing sample too, to see, where people are at as well. Okay, so next slide. So you want to ensure that your hiring staff understand relevant employment laws. Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, prohibits employers from asking disability-related questions at certain points in the employment process. That sounds a little bit, that's a little bit, muddy now when we're talking about peer staff, right? And it's important not to assume that a person in recovery will require any modification or performance exemption simply because they have a lived experience or they disclose that. So basically, like, you shouldn't just assume that your staff need an accommodation unless something presents that, maybe they might have some sort of performance issue, and that's okay. We do need to remember that everybody has lived experience, but um, part of that the ADA Act is confidentiality, right? So one of the things that I ensure my peer candidates when I interview them is that I'm not going to talk about their lived experience with anybody else outside of the interview. That's their story to share, and it's not mine to to talk to other people about. So, hiring staff should be versed in relevant employment laws. Staff should understand what questions are and are not acceptable at different points throughout the hiring process. Um, this role requires that candidates be comfortable in discussing their challenges associated with their lived experience. So hiring staff has to find a delicate balance in assessing this core competency. And I know in the chat, some people said that they do utilize their peer staff. That's a really great strategy, because peers can ask. I can lead with my own lived experience as a peer during an interview in order to talk to the candidate about their lived experience. So sometimes, for example, I'll say, for example, I'm a parent of a child who receives services through the, New York State Office of Mental Health, and has an IEP, is in, receives special education. So I will lead with examples of my own lived experience as a peer during those interviews, but I can do that, right? Because I'm a peer. So if you great strategy is to utilize your existing peer staff, train them to conduct interviews or to be present with you during the interview, so that you can ask those kind of questions. And also, it makes the candidate a little bit more comfortable when there's another person with lived experience there. I used to conduct interviews with another person, and she was not a peer, and she would tell me, that she was fine. She felt, very competent when interviewing staff, but she also said that when I would come on to the interview and I would start talking, it would it changed things. You know, people, you could see maybe people's shoulders dropped a little bit more. They got a little bit more comfortable just be, and it's the same idea of families, right? That's why family, we bring in peers for families. So, um, and again, important not to just assume that because someone's a peer, they're going to require modifications. However, if they need accommodations, you should not hesitate to, help them obtain those accommodations like extended breaks, modification in the work environment, or the use of technology. Next slide. So interview questions, the good versus the bad. Please share in the chat some interview questions that you feel are good versus bad. Yes, Kristen. Yep, bad. That's a great question, Rachel. How do you mitigate stress related to workplace responsibilities? You do want to ask things like that. You want, some things that I might ask are, tell me how you respond to stress, and not because it's going to really exclude someone. Yes, it's so that I'm aware, so that I can also, as the supervisor, as the hiring manager, maybe put some interventions in place so that to avoid those things. Yes. What does success look like to you when working with families? I like that a lot. What would you do if you went to visit someone and they had very strong emotions? How do you relate as a peer? Tell me about a time you used your story to benefit others. I like that one, Jay, too. That's a really great example of sharing your story intentionally. Yes. What do you do for self-care? That's super important. I see a lot of good questions. Anybody have any more examples of some negative or some bad interview questions? That's great too. How would you describe your role to other clinical staff? Okay. Next slide. I'm going to give you some sample interview questions that you can use. So what is your peer professional qualification? Are you a New York certified peer specialist? Are you a youth peer advocate? Are you a family peer advocate? Can you tell me some ways that you might use your personal lived experience to support the people you'd be working with? What is your experience with the mental health system? What role has peer support had in your own recovery? Can you give an example of your ability to speak up in difficult or intimidating situations? What I like is I see some sort of version of some of these questions in the chat, right? We saw some people are already asking these types of questions, and that's great. So next, after you're interviewing and hiring, the next, you decided you're going to move forward with this candidate and you're going to hire them for your organization. And so now you need to start thinking about onboarding and what comes next, right? So now you've done the interview, they've gone through the process. They're going through clearances and or whatever is needed for your organization. And so the next thing is which is onboarding. And so for onboarding, I'm going to pass that back over to Amy.
Thanks, Jen. Well, so, and again, I love all of these answers in the chat, and I love that it's an engaging, a group and that we're learning from each other, right? Because I think that, creating space to hear everybody's voice is just ideal in situations like this because everybody has different experiences and, a lot of trial and error and what works and what doesn't. And, that doesn't just carry over in, in the recruiting and in the hiring process, it carries over into the onboarding, right? So in different agencies and different organizations have different levels of onboarding and, what that looks like, I look at onboarding in two pieces. Something that I've always done historically when I would be onboarding new staff would be, looking at it from an administrative perspective as well as looking at it from, a peer's perspective. And that's really when you think about, you have your HR policies and the onboarding of that. And, to Jen's point, right? Like your clearances and, your things like that, submit your credentialing, all of that part of that onboarding. But I like to look at, the peer perspective on onboarding as where you really get into it, right? So next slide, please. So you think about the components that go into that, right? So welcome, you're hired, and I want to introduce you to the rest of the team. What are how are you preparing your team for a new employee to come on in, right? And how are you preparing for an individual to think about, okay, I'm bringing a peer onto the team. We're a team of, multiple different disciplines, some clinical, maybe some not. And, think about how you're going to prep your team. And then how you're going to onboard that individual, how you're going to bring that peer into that. So it's a little bit of that organizational orientation that is a two-way street for me, right? So you're orienting your existing staff as well as orienting your incoming staff, right? Your new peers. And part of that, to be able to do that, is really understanding the role. And again, two-way street, right? So as an individual who's bringing, if I'm the person onboarding, I really need to understand that role. And if I am a peer, I'm going to have, leg up on understanding that role. If I'm not a peer, then I have to do my due diligence and I have to educate myself on understanding that role. I have to, train up, right? I have to really, extend my reach to peer trainings, right? Learn if you're not a peer and you're ready to onboard a peer, it's the value in understanding the role is just unmeasurable, right? So to be able to train up, like I said, utilize different trainings. There's supervisor trainings out there. There's hiring and onboarding tools for bringing peers on. So there's a lot of different things out there on multiple different platforms. PeerTech, for example, has multiple different resources available to be able to support that, to be able to expand your knowledge and, really create an understanding of that role. And to, help the existing staff understand as well and to educate. So they understand those competencies, they understand the fidelity of the service, they understand the activities and the roles and the responsibilities. And when you're doing that, you're thinking about, a big part of that is like the training, right? So you're training your staff, you're training yourself, and then, you're bringing that peer into an organization. You're not only looking to, provide training and orientation to that peer on the organization, but you're also looking and considering how you can provide training support for that peer on the delivery of the service, right? On the application and the skill set needed. You're also thinking about your supervision format and your structure. It's really important to think about what is needed with regards to supervision of peers, right? And what that would look like, right across from, frequency and, the format of that, what works for the peer. It's great to have an idea of a format and a structure while you're onboarding, but I also think there's value in collaboration with regards to that as well. As I've in the past have brought peers on and hired peers and talked to them, asked them, what is it that you need from supervision? What is it that's going to be valuable for you? I've learned that everybody learns differently and everybody processes things differently, right? And everyone has different needs. So you have that administrative piece. Get your timesheets in, PTO is requested, but you also have that other piece, right, of that peer piece, right? And what does that look like for an individual, and how can you develop a format and a structure that's going to allow for success? right? And then with regards to the onboarding process, and you're thinking about, okay, you know what you need to do. I, how am I going to support you, right? How in my onboarding of a new peer, how am I going to support you? And that is providing those opportunities for shadowing. That's a really big, a really big opportunity to be able to provide that on-the-job training. That term, I haven't heard that term in a lot recently, on-the-job training, and that is shadowing, right? That is, modeling, that is learning from, maybe, a staff with more experience, right? And that goes into all those components of onboarding, learning, just understanding the organization, getting to know who people are. But that shadowing piece with delivery of service is really, really valuable. And then professional development, that's a key part of thinking about your onboarding process, and the continuing education of that, right? We're always learning. We are continuous learners, and we continue to grow by learning. And how are we going to incorporate that into an onboarding plan, right? Onboarding is going to be continuous. And another important piece of this is to be able to stay connected with the peer support community. Hiring, recruiting, and onboarding peers, to Jen's point earlier, might look a little bit different, right? Peers are coming with lived experience. We need to be informed about that. We need to, something that we haven't touched in on today, and I will just touch on it in a little tiny bit, is to be trauma informed about what we're doing, right? And to have that awareness of lived experience, and to really provide an onboarding experience to the fidelity of the peer principles. So next slide, please. So the value of training. I did touch in on this a little bit. I'm really a firm believer in the value of training, and really providing individuals training in areas that really is going to allow for growth, and really allow for individuals to really continue to really grow in their career, as well as to continue to enhance the skills that they have, and to continue to elevate new skills. So when we think about, areas, excuse me, for training and topics that are necessary for peers to receive during their onboarding, I mean, I could think of a ton of them off the top of my head. But first, I want to hear from you as to what areas or topics that if you were onboarding a peer today, would be, top priority for you to be able to feel that they need, and they absolutely have to have during their onboarding process. So I encourage you to put that. I see boundaries. Yes, boundaries are huge. Really understanding boundaries. HIPAA and confidentiality. Love seeing that. Crisis management, right? So, back to the HIPAA and confidentiality. What we do is confidential. We work with families who are sharing, their lived experience. They're sharing their stories. We're working with families and youth and adults. We're in their world. We're meeting them where they're at, and we respectfully have to be, keep their story and their recovery journey confidential. Self-care, teamwork, trainings. Yes, crisis management is a big one. Really, we have been in situations, I'm sure, as peers and peer providers, that we've been in crisis, and we probably managed our crisis to meet the needs of our crisis in that individual. But as a provider, as a support provider, providing to individuals and to families and to youth, we need to understand crisis management, right? So that is a really valuable training content area and topic. Civility in the workplace. I love that. I love that, right? We're working together and to really have that respect of civility. I love that. Effective and supportive self-disclosure. Very well said. Very well said. Very well said. Excellent. Excellent. Is there anything administratively, right? Think about like administrative responsibilities or tasks when you're hiring and onboarding somebody. Is there anything administratively of a content area or a topic that you would think would be necessary for peers to receive as part of their training during onboarding?
No, me
I
don't.
only phone it got through good part. Is that the iPhone.
I'm sorry,
And
could you
then
repeat that?
my phone was an Android phone, and then I don't
What
know.
can
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I understood that. If you could pop it in the chat, that would be helpful. Time reporting. Interesting. Something that I haven't seen pop up yet is documentation, right? I think that's a really strong administrative piece to onboarding with regard the value of training. De-escalating safety techniques, yes, to documentation. We all have to document. You know, that's one of those administrative tasks that we have to do. And we definitely need to be able to train on that, right? Because there are specific criteria when it comes to documentation that we need to meet. Use documentation done right as an example and practice it well. First 90 days are reviewed by a supervisor. Excellent. Excellent suggestion. I love that. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, these are great ideas, you know, and training is really what's that? So, Diana, documentation done right is a training series, correct? Kristen, if you want to highlight that in the chat. We also have documentation tools and resources on PeerTech that you can refer to as well. So content, you know, various different content areas that you can cover with training. With regards to onboarding, you know, and you're bringing folks on, you are going to want to develop a training plan, right? You're going to want to developing a training plan that is incorporated into your onboarding when you are hiring and bringing peers on. So, really give that consideration, utilize resources that you have. And really think about different trainings that are out there that you could utilize. And not only, just as a reminder, not only think about trainings for, new hires, but also think about the trainings to be able to support your your current staff as well as your supervisors, so that everyone is very well informed. If we can move on to the next slide. So, all of these pieces, with regards to, thinking about and starting the hiring process, thinking right from developing your job description, right, from thinking about the compensation, thinking about, your interviewing process and how you're going to hire and your recruitment and how you're going to advertise, all of those components to this process of really building your workforce for your agency or for your organization. You're doing all of that, really, and you're thinking about retention, right? You're building these plans, you're building this infrastructure because you want to have retention. You want to be able to bring staff in. You want to be able to really have quality staff. You really want to be able to grow your staff, be able to support them. And you want to be able to retain your staff, right? And all of those pieces, when they work together, and they're successful, then you have really good staff retention. We're not in it to not have staff, right? So you want to be able to take all of your steps and to really be able to think everything through, so that you are able to retain your staff, and you'll be able to really create the pathway, right? Create your plan, create something that is going to continue that workforce. And you can slide on to the next slide, please. And you want to maintain that pathway, right? Because that longevity really builds your agency, your workforce, and it really builds success, right? And it provides growth, and it can support that career pathway for bringing on new staff and for creating opportunities and for that growth. So really, you want to stay connected. You want to establish that pathway for the workforce retention, and you want to think about all of those different components that build into that pathway, into your plan, and think about all of that. And really, one of the takeaways that I have when I think about building a pathway for workforce retention is that educational piece of it, right? Is that training, and you want to continue your education, continue your training, continue building your knowledge, right? Because things change so quickly. And what might work yesterday might not work tomorrow. And really utilize your networking, utilize your resources, and really think about, the peer community, to be able to support needs that you have, and really be able to lean on each other for those, natural supports. If we could go to the next slide. So just thinking about it, think about that retention. We talked about a couple of these different items. If you could choose one to really prioritize the significance, what one would be your top significant topic of what you would want to highlight, right? So, you have good supervision, you have increased wages, you have career ladder, respect, recognition, meaningful work. What one would be, your priority for, maintaining staff retention? Respect and recognition, removing power differentials between team members, regardless of credentials, and also the participants of our programs. Good supervision. Yeah, I agree with both. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I actually agree with all of these. I don't think I could prioritize one over the other, right? I think that, exactly, Rebecca, thank you. All of these are important. I think they all carry a significant weight, that is, just as meaningful as the next. And I think, if you can, really maintain and meet the significant of all of the components, I think you have a really good recipe for hiring and for onboarding, and then ultimately for staff retention. So yeah, I agree. I think all of these are just as important. Next slide, please. So we are coming to the end of our wrap up here. So we did talk about a lot, and I really, again, I want to thank everybody for their contributions within the chat. It's really, I really love hearing from folks. So, right out of the gate, I want to thank everybody for that. And as a wrap up, we started out with that organizational assessment, and we gave you all an opportunity to do that self-assessment, do a little bit of self-reflecting on where you fall with understanding and knowledge, or where your agency falls, right? With regards to the hiring process, in regards to onboarding, retention. Something that we've mentioned throughout is some resources and tools, right, that we have that are available through PeerTech on our PeerTech website. There are supporting toolkits there. We have an adult peer specialist hiring toolkit. We have a family hiring toolkit. We also have a youth hiring toolkit, amongst many other different resources that could be very, very supportive. You also on that website can find the organizational assessment as well, to be able to take back, utilize as that self-reflection tool. Next slide. Yeah. So folks, like I said, this is the last webinar within our series, and I really would like to extend a thank you to all of you. And it really, right here is our feedback survey, and it is really important for us to receive your feedback. Your feedback really does help us, think forward as to, what the community is looking for with regards to support, with regards to future trainings and future opportunities. So I really do encourage you to provide some information. Click on that link within that feedback survey. You'll also receive it in an email afterwards, but I do really ask that you all just take a few minutes and to be able to complete that survey, because it really does drive a lot of the work that we do. One of the next things is that now that we're closing our series, the one more opportunity that you all have is our shared collaboration hour that is a complement to this webinar, right? So each of you that attended today will receive a link. After the webinar has ended, you'll receive the slides. You will also receive a link to join us next week on the 12th from 3 to 4 for a collaboration hour. This collaboration hour will provide an opportunity for you all to come back, talk to myself and talk to Jen, and to be able to, you know, bring some of your thoughts to us, bring some of your questions, bring some conversation, and really create some space for us to learn from each other, and for us to really take what we have discussed here today and really expand on that. So I really look forward to seeing you all there. And then lastly, if anybody has any additional questions, we do have a minute or so to be able to take a couple questions in the chat. If not, I encourage you to bring your questions and your thoughts to that collaboration hour. And if anybody does not have any questions, like I said, I thank you all for joining us today. And I thank Jen for being my co-presenter here today. And I look forward and hope to see you all next week on the 12th. Thank you, everybody.
I had just a quick question, if you can stay after for a second.
Yeah, I'm here, Brian. Go for it.
Excellent and very informative, first and foremost.
Thank
I
you.
just transitioned to the promotion of supervisor late October, and early on you had said something about this was part 3 of a 3-part series, maybe. When would I have access to the first 2?
Yep, those 2 are actually available on our PeerTech website under our resources. If Angelique is quick-fingered, she might be able to pop a link into the chat for you. If not, I can, oh, see, there it is. She's that fast.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I,
So those 2 are available there. And I also want to encourage everybody, you know, just to stay attuned to some upcoming announcements as well. We are PeerTech is hosting a supervision summit in January. So, you know, there will be that's going to be a 1.5-day virtual summit that's going to be able to provide additional workshops and available resources for you all to attend with regards to supervision.
awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't ever hesitate to reach out to us. Our contact information is here. You can always reach out, ask any questions, and we can certainly, you know, have conversations and connect you with additional resources. But
I
like I
could
said, I
be
hope to. Yeah, go for it.
sorry, I cut you off. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I could be incorrect because they've thrown so much training at me in the last month and a half, but did PeerTech also do the family peer training specific?
Nope, that is CTEC. If you're talking about the family
CTech.
training specific for supervisors, that you would find on CTEC. That's one of our other techs. We're all related, but you will find that one specifically on CTEC.
Yeah, it was a 60-minute course specifically
Yeah.
on yep. I just wanted to let you know, whoever, that I actually incorporated that into my first peer teams meeting because we just hired a family peer. So that was also a very great training as well. So thank you guys for
Awesome.
everything and happy holidays. All right.
Yeah, likewise to you as well.
All right. Bye.
Thank you. All right.